Happy 2024, everybody! We're going to start this new year off strongly by remaking one of my first and worst videos. I was a little too green back in the day to tackle something as heavy as Heathers, but now I feel like I'm finally ready. Like most great films out there, Heathers' production history can be described as a complicated roller coaster. Let me tell you all about it.
I'll tell everyone about tonight.
This, my friends and newcomers, is the complete history of Heathers 1988. We'll cover the musical and other adaptation sometime in the future, okay? Let me set the scene. It was the 1980s. In terms of high school movies, John Hughes and his imitators reigned supreme. However, none of these films were able to capture what high school was really like. The kids were happy, positive, and nowhere close to hormonal. Everybody got along, had dreams and ambitions, and the endings were always happy. This style of movie was starting to get under the skin of a video store worker by the name of Daniel Waters. He remembered what high school was like, and it wasn't anything close to what you saw on the silver screen. There was anger, bitterness, betrayal, cliques. Things that could be present in a John Hughes movie, but were all erased by the end. Waters decided that if Hollywood wasn't going to fix these mistakes, he would fix them instead. And thus, the concept for Heathers was born. A 16-year-old girl by the name of Veronica would be adopted into the most popular clique at her school, with each other member of the clique being named Heather.
It's your turn, Heather.
No, Heather, it's Heather's turn. Sorry, Heather.
Everything would be going okay, up until a dark, mysterious young man by the name of JD would come to the school. He and Veronica would hit it off, and the two would slowly start killing the popular kids at school, all while disguising the murders as suicides.
Like a suicide thing?
Not the kind of movie that people in 1986 were used to seeing. The first draft of Heathers was practically a novel, over 250 pages in length, and little by little with each coming draft, the script would be shortened down just a little bit. But at the end of the third and final draft, it was a 3-hour-long behemoth. This is because Waters originally intended Stanley Kubrick to direct the film, which didn't exactly happen. We don't even know if Kubrick ever got the script, but what we do know is that many other agencies and studios in Hollywood did. They all loved what they read, but none of them would dare produce the script. They all considered it too dark to be a viable project. This was especially because around the time that the Heathers script was circulating, there was a teen suicide epidemic going throughout the country. Waters, of course, knew this and decided to satirize this within the script. He wasn't exactly making fun of teen suicide, more so the way that the media and the schools involved would respond to the deaths, turning them into circuses and portraying the victims as martyrs that everybody loved, even if they weren't. But that didn't matter. And since Waters didn't have an agent, when he got turned down, that was it. No studio wanted to negotiate with some nobody video store clerk. Right around the time when Waters was able to get an agent, a fledgling production company by the name of New World Pictures caught wind of the project, and they wanted in. Much like how Orion saw UHF as a possible way to save the company, New World thought that Heathers could be something bold and daring enough to put them back on the map, or at least pull them out of their steady financial decline. From there, Heathers officially began production, but with a much smaller budget than expected. Remember, Waters was expecting a major studio and director to be involved, so the fact that New World Pictures could only afford $3 million was far from ideal. But then again, this was the best offer Waters got, as well as the only one, but still, the crew had to make do with what they had. Speaking of the crew, because the very nature of Heathers was, well, let's be real, untouchable, most Hollywood insiders weren't interested in working on the movie, and those who were interested were definitely not interested in being paid a paltry sum. That's why most of the Heathers production crew consisted of either people who were morbidly curious, or those who just needed experience. One such person who belonged in the latter camp was the director, Michael Lehman. Once he joined the project, it was officially his. Waters had little to no involvement going forward. He, of course, was able to share his input, but in terms of overall authority, it was minimal to none. In fact, he wasn't even involved in the casting process whatsoever. He wasn't even informed that it was going on. This greatly upset him because he already had a cast in mind, most notably Jennifer Connelly as Veronica.
I wrote the script for Jennifer Connelly.
Lehman, on the other hand, had other plans, and those plans were get anybody who was interested, have them read, and hope they don't bail. They had a hard time getting people involved in this movie. They offered roles to Justine Bateman and Heather Graham, but those girls turned them down. Or I guess in the case of Heather Graham, her parents turned them down on her behalf. But even so, gathering a cast that was good, let alone reliable, was turning out to be quite the task. Luckily for them, a young then unknown actress by the name of Winona Ryder became interested in the script. Not only was she drawn to the dark nature of the script, but she also experienced something very similar in her own high school life. Not going around killing popular kids, but seeing someone in her school that was unpopular kill herself.
And then as soon as she committed suicide, everybody was talking about how great she was and saying that they were friends, and her funeral was huge. And it was like, just really struck me because I was so disgusted with the behavior of my school.
And when she saw the same concept being satirized in Heathers, she knew she had to join. Her agent wasn't so supportive though, and actually got down on her knees begging Ryder not to audition, but of course, as we all know, Ryder did, and she got the part. And wouldn't you know it, the agent was dumped not too long later. Many young men auditioned for the role of the male lead JD, but none of them seemed to fit the part. One such person being a then unknown Brad Pitt, by the way. Apparently, they all read the scene completely straight. Nobody got the humor of the situation. That is, until Christian Slater decided to audition, and he ended up amazing everybody, except for himself. He was so convinced that he bombed the audition that he threw somewhat of a tantrum outside of the office, ending with him throwing the script away in the trash. Much to his surprise, he got the part. His mom wasn't too happy about him being involved in a movie like this, but hey, as long as he was happy, he was all set. Shannon Doherty was originally brought in to read for Heather Chandler, but upon reading the script, she was drawn to Heather Duke. This is partially because her own experience in high school was just like hers. She started off by being a bit of a punching bag, but then became the queen bee. Only, unlike Heather Duke, I'm sure the power didn't go to her head. While Doherty got the part, she wasn't exactly prepared for the kind of movie she'd be involved in. She knew it would be dark, she knew it would be controversial, but what she did not know was that it would be a comedy.
I'm gonna have to send my SAT scores to San Quentin instead of Stanford.
She was convinced that this was some kind of melodrama or psychological thriller, and while it most certainly is a thriller, the comedic aspects were lost on her for the longest time. She didn't find out until the rap party. Lisanne Falk got the role of Heather McNamara, and unbeknownst to the crew, she was actually 23 at the time of getting the part. Casting directors were pretty uncomfortable with finding someone to play the part of Martha Dunstock, mostly because the part required somebody overweight and unattractive. Calling somebody that and saying that they were perfect for the role wouldn't exactly be, nice, now would it? However, Carrie Lynn was more than willing to play the part. In her own words, "I was doing stand-up at the time. That's how I first met the casting agent. I think most of it was because I looked the part. Where else were you gonna find another 400-pound young person? I think I came out of the womb obese. I had no friends. I was Martha Dump Truck in real life, growing up in Beverly Hills. And now I've got therapy." Waters was mostly fine with the cast that they got, but he was not a fan of Slater whatsoever. Until he saw Slater on set. Then he became a believer. As production was going on, the script was getting cut down more and more. Waters was not happy. He would later go on to describe himself as being a bit idealistic about how Hollywood's supposed to work. This was his vision. No one was allowed to compromise this. I mean, come on, this was supposed to be a Kubrick movie. But Lehman didn't see it that way. He wanted to cut the script down again and again. One of the most notable fights that the two of them had was the portrayal of Veronica. In the original script, Veronica was going to be just as bad as JD, but what Lehman wanted was an audience surrogate, Somebody that the audience could root for. A girl who may not have been the best person around. After all, she didn't do anything to stop Ram when he was forcing himself on Heather McNamara. But even so, she was an ordinary teenage girl, albeit a bit jaded, who was caught in a bad situation. Waters was fighting very hard against this, mostly because of the original ending that he had in mind. It was going to play out exactly as it does in the final film. JD blows himself up, Veronica leaves the Heathers group, and she asks Martha Dunstock if she wants to hang out. But instead of accepting, Dunstock would instead kill Veronica, calling her Heather. This ending was ultimately scrapped. Instead, Waters pitched a new ending to the film that would involve the entire school blowing up and Westerberg High having a prom in heaven where everybody finally gets along. It was actually New World Pictures that shut this ending down, originally saying that it was because of budget concerns, but then later admitting that it was too dark for their tastes. But regardless of the reason, Lehman insisted that Heathers would have a relatively happy ending instead. Aside from this one intervention from New World Pictures, they were mostly hands-off. Whether that was because they lacked the money, power, or guts to intervene, that's up for debate. And it's a good thing they let the cast and crew to their own devices, because everybody had a great time on set. Everybody was getting along, making some inside jokes, and having a great experience overall. Funny enough, though, the cliques as seen in the movie were starting to form in real life. The popular kids were all hanging out, the nerds were all hanging out, and JD, or Christian Slater in this case, was all by himself, smoking cigarettes in his trailer. It seems like Slater was the one who got most into his character, considering that when discussing times like these, he had a very JD-ish response. I got so into working with Winona that I had blinders on to everyone else. It was almost like JD didn't have any patience for those people either. I stayed away from Shannon. She seemed to not have any interest in me, so I just kept my distance. He would frequently show up late to rehearsals and shoots because he kept oversleeping. Slater would later deny that this was the case, but it seems like everybody else agreed that it happened, so I guess make of that what you will. Many of the crew members, most notably their star, Winona Ryder, were underage at the time of production, meaning that they had to work around child labor laws in order to get the film made. This turned out to be a difficult feat to accomplish considering that they only had 33 days to shoot. Luckily, thanks to some rewrites and some ingenuity on the parts of the crew, they were able to do the best with what they had. The only person that was having a difficult time on set was Shannon Doherty. She grew up in a pretty conservative household where swearing wasn't exactly accepted, so the fact that she would have to say lines like this,
Veronica, you look like hell.
or this,
Veronica, why are you pulling my
made her feel very uncomfortable, especially considering that her mom was always on set. That's gotta be awkward.
Heather, your mother's here. Why?
Not only was the cast having a good time, but the crew was having a lot of fun as well. Even though they had a limited budget, they did whatever they could to help the film stand out artistically, most notably in the colors. In the beginning of the movie, all of the colors would be bright and vibrant. But the more dark things would happen, the darker the colors would be and the dimmer the lighting would get. Adding in distinct yet economic touches like that all throughout the film made it just that much better. Despite all of this positivity going around on set, the outside world wasn't as excited. There was some negative buzz going around because, ooh, it's dark. And while yes, it was starting to taint the film's image, it was also hard for people to actually know that the movie was being made. Since the budget was minuscule, nobody was giving it the time of day, outside of giving it some mildly amused reactions to its dark nature. Though some negative reactions were coming in with several companies who didn't want their products to be seen in the film. They felt that if the characters would show them off, it would be seen as product placement of sorts, implying that they were okay with a film of this nature. The crewmakers had to be very careful with what brands they could and could not include. Good thing Corn Nuts didn't have any issues. At long last, in 1988, Heathers was finally complete. It was originally screened overseas and then later at the Sundance Festival, ultimately receiving some mixed reviews. Some considered it dark, disturbing, and unpleasant, and some considered it dark, disturbing, and unpleasant. It seemed like most people either loved or hated the movie for the same reasons. It was one of the most subjective responses the filmmakers had ever seen. But now that the Sundance screening was over, it was time to release Heathers to the general public. Except that wasn't going to be easy because New World Pictures ran into a problem: death. They were just about to close their doors, leaving no money to pay for any advertisements for Heathers, causing producer Denise Di Novi to pay for all of the North American advertisements from her own pocket. In terms of international advertising, New World Pictures cut a very misleading trailer together for its European release, even changing the name of the film to Lethal Attraction. They also suggested that Heathers would be changed to The Murders of Heather High in North America, but of course that didn't stick. By the third week of Heathers' limited release, New World Pictures shut down, causing Heathers to suffer as a result. It only gained a little over $1 million, and when stacked against its meager $3 million budget, Heathers became a giant failure.
That's it. We're breaking up.
What?
There was originally some talks about a sequel, most notably coming from Winona Ryder, who was salivating at the chance to play Veronica again, but the fact that Heathers bombed at the box office, as well as the lack of a solid idea for a sequel, shut those plans down. For years, Winona Ryder would be asking the crew for another movie, but one never got made. Critics and audience members seemed to like it though, so at least there was that. In the coming years, Heathers would gain a cult following, often being considered one of the best dark movies of its time. That cult following grew bigger and bigger as the decades would go on, and it grew so big in fact that in 2010 there was a Broadway musical based on the movie, and we'll talk about that one of these days.
Greetings and salutations. You want a Slurpee with that?
And in 2018 there was a made-for-TV reboot based on the movie to update it for modern times. And once again, unfortunately, we'll be getting to that another day.
The preferred term is body positive.
So that, my friends, is the complete history of Heathers, or as I called it back in my early days, the little film that could. It seemed like everything was going against it. What with actors not being interested, studios being scared away, companies wanting no part of the picture, and the production company shutting down. But despite all of that, it became one of the most beloved films of its time, even if that didn't exactly happen when it first came out. I guess this just goes to show that sometimes, some of the movies that people are most scared to make turn out to be some of the best. Kinda like Shrek. All things come back to Shrek. Well, folks, thanks for watching the video. What'd you guys think? What do you think of Heathers, and what do you think is the wildest part of its production? Comment below and let me know, because I'm always excited to hear what you guys have to say. And now it's time to thank our wonderful Patreon people, starting with our Masters of Fate. Chan 11, Drew the Stew, Elisamir Rogers Archer, Kev Messick, Platinum Bass, Quiet Chap, Ryan Williams, Timey, and Woody Woo. And now our executive producers, Albert Robinson, Blackjack, H.R. Huffman, Indiscreet One, Leaf Storm, Ravioli Supremo, Unkale, and who else but Zane. If you too would like your name read at the end of every Media Mementos video, then why not consider donating to the Patreon? There's a fancy little link in the description below for you to check out. And if you want to get more involved in the Media Mementos fan community, there's a link to the channel's Discord server as well. Feel free to stop on by and say hello. Alright folks, thanks for watching the video, and corn nuts!
My mom's making my favorite meal tonight. Spaghetti.
I hope she made
Lots of spaghetti.
Oh, nice. Moby Dick.